The great hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as the emergency alarm echoed through its crystal walls. Speaker Veltar stood at the center of the massive chamber, his blue skin darker than usual with worry. Around him, representatives from dozens of worlds watched the holographic display showing burning cities and fleeing ships. The Zephyrian Empire has begun their assault on Altani Prime, Veltar announced. His voice carried to every corner of the hall without effort. 3 billion peaceful beings are under attack. Their defense fleet lasted only 6 hours. A wave of shocked whispers filled the chamber. The Altani were known throughout the galaxy as gentle farmers and artists. They had no military worth speaking of, only small patrol ships to watch there. Borders Counselor Jara of the Beetle clans clicked her mandibles in anger. This breaks every law of civilized warfare. The Zephyrians gave no formal challenge. They offered no terms for surrender. War Prince Thakmor claims the Altani refused to pay tribute, replied Ambassador Crix from his floating chair. He says, this gives him the right to take their world by force. Veltar gestured and the display changed. It now showed massive Zephyrian battleships, each one the size of a small moon. Their dark hulls bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Their fleet is the largest we have seen in 300 years. They have broken the ancient laws that keep war civilized. What forces can we gather? Asked General Torvanus of the Iron Stars. His mechanical voice showed his frustration. My fleets are scattered across 12 systems. It would take weeks to bring them together. The same for all of us, Veltar said sadly. By the time we organize a proper response, Altani Prime will be a dead world. The hall fell quiet again. Everyone knew the rules of galactic warfare. Armies met in space, far from populated worlds. Battles were fought with honor, giving the losing side chances to surrender. Civilians were never targeted. These rules had kept the galaxy stable for centuries, but the Zephyrians had ignored every rule. There is one option, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. All heads turned toward Counselor Nixara, an ancient being whose species had been part of the Council since its founding. Her 4 eyes blinked slowly as she spoke. The Terran. Exclusion Treaty, signed 200 years ago after the Proxima incident. A chill seemed to fill the air at the mention of that name. Veltar's blue skin grew even darker. The humans were banned from galactic warfare for good reason, Counselor. You were there. You remember what they did? I remember that they won, Nixara replied calmly. In 3 days, a single human regiment defeated forces that had held Proxima Station for months. They used forbidden tactics. Jara clicked angrily. They turned medical supplies into bombs. They used civilian areas as battlefields. They made war into something ugly and brutal. War is ugly and brutal, Nixara said. The humans simply refused to pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, 2,000 light-years away on Earth's moon, Captain Jake Morrison stared at his communication screens in his small office at Luna Base. The blue marble of Earth hung in the black sky outside his window, peaceful and quiet. Few people on that world below knew that their planet had once been part of a great galactic community. Captain, you need to hear this, called Lieutenant Amy Foster from her station nearby. Her young face was pale with worry. Jake walked over to her console. Amy had been monitoring deep space signals for 3 years, but she had never looked this upset. It's a distress call, she said quietly. From the Altani system. The translation program is having trouble, but I think they're asking for help. Jake listened to the strange musical language coming through the speakers. Even translated into English, the desperation was clear. Ships full of families were running for their lives. Their world was burning. They had nowhere to go. How many refugee ships? Jake asked. The computer counts over 4,000 signals, Amy replied. But there are more launching every minute, and Captain, there are Zephyrian war fleets chasing them. Jake closed his eyes. He had studied the old records from before the treaty. He knew what Zephyrian war fleets could do. Their idea of mercy was killing quickly instead of slowly. Send a coded message to Admiral Clark on Earth, he ordered. Tell him we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Should I mention the treaty? Amy asked. He'll know, Jake said grimly. 3 hours later, Jake stood in the secure conference room deep inside Luna Base. Admiral Ben Clark's weathered face filled the main screen, broadcasting from Fleet Command in Colorado. With him were General Patricia Stone from the Marines and Dr. Helen Ward from the Alien Studies Department. The situation is bad, Admiral Clark began without introduction. Our deep space monitors confirm massive civilian casualties. The Zephyrians are not following any rules of war. What about the other Council species? Asked General Stone. Surely they'll respond. Dr. Ward shook her head. They're still following their old procedures. Formal challenges, proper formations, honor guards. By the time they organize their fleets, the Altani will be extinct. And if we help? Jake asked the question they were all thinking. Admiral Clark was quiet for a long moment. The treaty specifically forbids human military forces from operating outside our solar system. Breaking it could mean war with the entire Galactic Council. Or it could mean saving 3 billion innocent lives, General Stone said quietly. Jake thought about Amy's translations of the distress calls. Families crowded into cargo ships running from an enemy that showed no mercy. Children who would never see their home world again. Parents who died protecting their young. Admiral, Jake said slowly, what if we're not the ones who break the treaty? What do you mean? Clark asked. What if someone comes to us? What if they ask for our help officially? Dr. Ward understood first. If a council member requests our aid, we wouldn't be breaking the treaty. We'd be responding to a formal request. That's a thin line, Admiral Clark warned. It's still a line, Jake replied. And right now, it might be the only one we have. As if summoned by their conversation, Amy's voice came over the intercom. Captain Morrison, we have an incoming ship, small craft, Altani design. They're requesting permission to land. Jake looked at the faces on his screen. Admiral Clark nodded slowly. Permission granted, Jake said. And Amy? Make sure we record everything. Outside Luna Base, a small silver ship settled onto the landing pad. Its hull was scorched from battle, and one wing was barely holding together. As the airlock opened, a tall figure in flowing robes stepped onto human soil for the first time in 2 centuries. Seer Nairu of the Altani had come to ask the forbidden question. She had come to wake the sleeping giants that the galaxy had tried so hard to forget. Seer Nairu sat in the medical bay of Luna Base, her tall frame wrapped in a blanket that human doctors had given her. Her silver skin was marked with burns from her escape, and her large eyes held memories of horrors that would never fade. Captain, Jake Morrison sat across from her while Dr. Helen Ward worked as translator. My world is gone, Nehru said in her musical language. Dr. Ward's computer turned her words into English. The Zephyrians came without warning. They destroyed our cities from orbit before landing their armies. Jake had seen the reports, but hearing it from a survivor made it real. How many escaped? Perhaps 1 in 10, Nehru replied. Most ships were destroyed before they could leave the atmosphere. Those of us who made it out are scattered across the galaxy with nowhere to go. Amy Foster entered the room quietly, carrying a datapad. Captain, Admiral Clark wants to speak with you. The Galactic Council has officially rejected our offer to help. They say the treaty cannot be broken under any circumstances. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Billions were dying while politicians worried about old paperwork. What about the other species? Are they mounting a rescue? The Crystalline Confederacy is still debating proper protocols, Amy said sadly. The Iron Stars say they need 6 months to gather their fleets. The Beetle clans refuse to break the laws of civilized warfare. Nairu looked between them, understanding, more English than she let on. This treaty you speak of, what did humans do that was so terrible? Dr. Ward glanced at Jake before answering. There was an incident 200 years ago. Human forces were fighting alongside council armies against an enemy called the Hive Collective. Jake knew the story by heart. Every military officer did. It happened at Proxima Station, he said quietly. A young Marine sergeant named Kate Johnson was there with her squad. 200 years earlier, 20-year-old Sergeant Kate Johnson, crouched behind a broken wall on Proxima Station. Around her, the bodies of alien allies lay scattered across the metal floor. The Hive Collective had overrun the station 3 months ago, and every attempt to retake it had failed. Kate's squad of 12 Marines was all that remained of the human forces. They were supposed to be supporting the main assault, but the main assault had been destroyed in the first hour. Now they were alone, cut off, and surrounded by thousands of insect-like enemies. "Sarge, we're almost out of ammo," whispered Private Danny Cole, his young face streaked with dirt and fear. Kate looked at their supplies. 6 grenades, 4 medical kits, and a maintenance toolkit that Corporal Linda Hayes had grabbed from an engineering station. Standard military thinking said they should surrender or make a heroic last stand. Kate Johnson was not a standard military thinker. "Hayes, what's in that toolkit?" she asked. Linda dumped the contents on the floor. "Standard. Repair gear. Welding torch, chemical sealants, power cells, some kind of cleaning fluid." Kate picked up a container of the cleaning fluid and read the label. Her eyes grew wide. "This stuff is industrial solvent, highly corrosive." "So?" asked Danny. "So we're going to make some new friends," Kate said with a grim smile. 20 minutes later, Kate and her squad moved through the station's air vents like ghosts. They had mixed the cleaning fluid with medical supplies to create acid bombs. The welding torch became an incendiary device. Even the food rations were turned into sticky traps when combined with hull sealant. The Hive Collective expected frontal assaults and formal challenges. They had adapted to the way other species fought, with honor and predictable tactics. They were not prepared for humans who treated every object as a potential weapon. Kate's squad struck from above, below, and behind. They poisoned air supplies, collapsed corridors, and turned the station's own systems against its occupiers. When the Hive tried to regroup, they found their command center filled with toxic gas. When they tried to retreat, they discovered that Kate had welded shut all the escape routes. In 3 days, 12 human Marines had retaken a station that 5,000 Council troops could not capture in 3 months. Back in the medical bay on Luna Base, Jake finished the story. When the Council forces arrived, they found Sergeant Johnson and her squad had not just won. They had turned the entire station into a weapon. Nehru listened with growing amazement. "This sounds like victory. Why were humans punished?" Dr. Ward looked uncomfortable. The Council species were horrified. They said humans fought without honor, that we made war too brutal, too efficient. "The real problem," Jake said, "was that other species started copying our tactics. Within a year, the Beetle clans were making improvised explosives. The Iron Stars began using civilian equipment as weapons. The whole structure of civilized warfare started to collapse." Amy's data pad chimed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her face going pale. "Captain, we're getting reports from across the galaxy. The Zephyrians aren't just attacking the Altani anymore. They've hit 3 more systems in the past day." "Which ones?" Jake asked. "The Gentle Winds colony, New Harmony, and the Crystal Gardens research station," Amy replied. "All peaceful worlds, all defenseless." Nehru stood up despite her injuries. "This is why I came here. The Zephyrians have learned something new. They fight like the old stories say humans fought. They use fear and surprise. They target the weak instead of meeting armies in open battle." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "They're using human tactics, but without human restraint," Dr. Ward added quietly. "Humans fought efficiently to end wars quickly. The Zephyrians are fighting efficiently to cause maximum terror." Nehru approached Jake, her large eyes filled with desperate hope. "The galaxy that feared your warriors now needs them. My people are dying. Others will follow. The Zephyrians have become what you were accused of being, but worse. The Council will never agree," Jake said. "They'd rather see worlds burn than admit they were wrong about us." "Then do not ask the Council," Nehru said simply. "Ask yourselves, how many innocent lives is your treaty worth?" Before Jake could answer, Admiral Clark's face appeared on the wall screen. His expression was grim. "Captain Morrison, we've just Received word that the Zephyrian fleet is moving toward the Gentle Wind system. 2 million civilians, mostly children and elderly who couldn't be evacuated in time. Jake looked at Nehru, then at his crew. Amy Foster was young, barely out of the academy, but her eyes held the same determination he had seen in old videos of Sergeant Kate Johnson. "Admiral," Jake said slowly, "I'm requesting permission to take the New Horizon on a reconnaissance mission to monitor the situation." Admiral Clark was quiet for a long moment. Reconnaissance was not technically a military action. It would not break the treaty, even if the ship happened to be in the right place at the right time to help refugees. "Permission granted, Captain," the Admiral said. "Take Lieutenant Foster and a full sensor array. Monitor and report only." "Understood, sir," Jake replied, but his eyes told a different story. As the connection ended, Nehru placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "Thank you," she said in perfect English. "Don't thank me yet," Jake replied. "We're about to remind the galaxy why they were afraid of us in the first place." Outside Luna Base, the sleek reconnaissance ship New Horizon began its pre-flight preparations. In a few hours it would leave human space for the first time in 2 centuries. Jake Morrison had no way of knowing that his decision would change the fate of the entire galaxy, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear the ghost of Sergeant Kate Johnson whispering, "Every problem has a solution, you just have to be willing to find it." The bridge of the New Horizon hummed with quiet activity as Captain Jake Morrison watched the stars streak past. They had been traveling for 3 days, moving faster than any human ship had gone beyond the solar system in 2 centuries. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat at the communications station, monitoring dozens of distress signals that grew stronger with each passing hour. "Captain, we're approaching the Gentle Wind system," reported Ensign Bobby Martinez from the navigation console. "Sensors are picking up massive energy signatures ahead." Jake studied the tactical display. What he saw made his blood run cold. 12 Zephyrian battleships surrounded the small colony world like hungry wolves. Each ship was 3 times larger than his reconnaissance vessel. Their weapons could turn the New Horizon into space dust in seconds. "Any sign of the colonists?" Jake asked. Amy's face was grim as she worked her console. "I'm reading evacuation, ships trying to reach the outer system. But the Zephyrians are hunting them down one by one, they're not taking prisoners." On the main screen, Jake watched a civilian transport explode in a ball of fire. Women and children had been on that ship, families trying to escape to safety. Now they were nothing but glowing particles in the void. "This isn't warfare," whispered Ensign Martinez. "This is murder." Jake's hands clenched into fists. The treaty said humans could only observe and report, but watching innocent people die while doing nothing felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "I'm getting a priority message from Earth. Admiral Clark has authorized Operation Homecoming." Jake's eyes widened. Operation Homecoming was a classified plan that had existed only in theory. It was humanity's response, if they ever needed to return to galactic warfare. He had never expected it to be activated. "What are our orders?" he asked. "We're to rendezvous with Major Lisa Park and the 1st Terran Expeditionary Force at coordinates that are being transmitted now," Amy replied. "ETA is 6 hours." Jake looked at the burning colony world on his screen, then at his small crew. They had signed up for a reconnaissance mission. Now they were about to become part of the first human military action beyond Earth in 200 years. "Set course," he ordered. "Maximum speed." 6 hours later, Jake stood on the bridge watching the most beautiful and terrifying sight he had ever seen. 50 human warships hung in space before them, their hulls painted flat black to absorb sensor scans. These were not the ceremonial vessels that other species used for warfare. These ships looked like what they were, tools designed for one purpose only. The flagship Iron Will was twice the size of a Zephyrian battleship, but it carried no decorative armor or honor banners. Every surface was covered with weapons, sensors, or defensive systems. It looked like a machine built by people who understood that war was work, not art. "New Horizon, this is Major Lisa Park aboard Iron Will," came a crisp voice over the communications system. "Captain Morrison, Please transport aboard for briefing. Minutes later, Jake found himself in the war room of the Iron Will, surrounded by officers he had only heard about in classified reports. Major Lisa Park was younger than he expected, but her eyes held the same cold intelligence he had seen in old videos of legendary human tacticians. Beside her stood Commander Alex Stone, a man whose reputation for unconventional warfare was known throughout the human military. His unit specialized in what the textbooks called adaptive combat solutions, and what everyone else called fighting dirty. "Gentlemen, we have a problem," Major Park began, activating a holographic display of the Gentle Wind system. "The Zephyrians have 16 battleships in this system alone. Intelligence reports suggest they have over 200 ships spread across 12 systems, all targeting civilian populations." "What about Council forces?" asked Captain Troy Mitchell, commander of a squadron of converted merchant vessels. "The Council is still debating proper response protocols," Commander Stone said with disgust. "They're arguing about formal challenges while entire worlds burn." Major Park highlighted several points on the tactical display. "The Zephyrians expect traditional space combat, ship-to-ship battles at long range with predictable formations. They've adapted their tactics to counter every known Council military doctrine. But they haven't adapted to counter us," Jake said, understanding where this was leading. "Exactly." Park smiled grimly. "They're about to learn why the galaxy was afraid of human military thinking." The briefing continued for an hour as Park outlined the battle plan. It was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet in formal battle, the humans would use tactics that the Zephyrians couldn't predict or counter. "Commander, Stone's ground forces would deploy using modified mining equipment and construction tools as weapons. Captain Mitchell's merchant ships would conduct hit-and-run attacks using cargo containers filled with improvised explosives. Even the Iron Will would fight in ways that broke every rule of civilized warfare." "What about the treaty?" asked one of the younger officers. "The treaty was written by people who thought war should be fair," Major Park replied. "But there's nothing fair about murdering civilians. We're not here to fight an honorable war. We're here to stop monsters." 2 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Gentle Wind system. The Zephyrian ships immediately moved to intercept them, forming the traditional battle lines that had worked against Council forces for centuries. War Prince Thakmor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Spear. He had studied the old records about human warfare, but those were 200 years old. Surely these soft creatures had grown civilized during their isolation. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," reported his communications officer. "Put it through," Thakmor commanded. He expected the usual formal challenge, demands for surrender or negotiations for terms. Instead, he heard a human female voice speaking in perfect Zephyrian. "This is Major Lisa Park of the Terran Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system and release all prisoners. This is your only warning." Thakmor laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Tell the humans that War Prince Thakmor does not negotiate with exiled cowards. If they want to die honorably, they may approach and face us in proper battle." The response came immediately. "Warning delivered. Good luck." The transmission ended, and Thakmor felt the first hint of unease. That did not sound like any military communication he had ever heard. It sounded more like a construction worker, warning someone to step back before demolishing a building. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "the human ships are scattering. They're not forming battle lines." Thakmor watched in confusion as the human fleet broke apart like water hitting rocks. Small groups of ships moved in unpredictable directions, some heading toward the planet, others toward the system's asteroid belt, and still others simply disappearing from sensors entirely. "Where did they go?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. They seem to have activated some kind of stealth system." What Thakmor didn't know was that the human ships weren't using stealth technology. They were using something far more dangerous, tactics that his people had never seen before. Captain Mitchell's converted merchant ships had disguised themselves as civilian vessels trying to escape the system. When Zephyrian ships moved to intercept them, they would discover too late that the cargo containers were actually missile launchers. Commander Stone's ground forces had landed on the planet's 3 moons using modified asteroid mining equipment. They were now using the moon's mineral processing plants to manufacture weapons and preparing to turn the entire satellite system into a fortress. Major Park's Iron Will had done something that no warship in galactic history had ever attempted. It had hidden inside the system's gas giant, using the planet's magnetic field to mask its signature, while mining the atmosphere for materials to build more weapons. "Sir, we're getting reports from across the fleet," the sensor officer said nervously. 3 ships have been destroyed by unknown weapons. 2 more report boarding parties using some kind of industrial equipment. Thakmor felt his confidence begin to crack. "Boarding parties? How did they get through our shields?" "They didn't come through the shields, sir. They came through the waste disposal systems." As the War Prince tried to process this information, his ship shuddered under impact from weapons that his sensors insisted weren't there. In the distance, he could see one of his battleships spinning out of control, its hull torn open by what looked like mining charges. These humans weren't fighting a war. They were solving a problem, and Thakmor was beginning to realize that his fleet had become the problem that needed solving. "All ships," he commanded, "withdraw to defensive positions around the planet. We'll make them come to us." But as his fleet regrouped, Thakmor discovered that the humans had no intention of coming to him. They were already everywhere, turning the entire star system into a weapon pointed at his heart. The war room aboard the Iron Will buzzed with activity as reports came in from across 12 star systems. Major Lisa Park stood before a massive holographic display showing the spread of human forces throughout Zephyrian-controlled space. What had started as a rescue mission at Gentle Winds had become something much larger. "Captain Mitchell's merchant fleet has taken the Kithara system," reported Lieutenant Colonel Frank Davis, Park's intelligence officer. "The Zephyrians are calling it impossible. They say cargo ships cannot defeat battleships." Park smiled grimly. "They're right. Cargo ships can't defeat battleships, but cargo ships carrying fusion charges from mining operations and piloted by people who don't care about fighting fair can do amazing things." Across the galaxy, Captain Troy Mitchell stood on the bridge of his converted freighter Lucky Strike, watching Zephyrian ships burn in the void around him. His fleet of 30 civilian vessels had just destroyed twice their number in military ships, and the enemy still didn't understand how. "Chief Wells, how are our special packages holding up?" Mitchell asked his chief engineer. "Chief Petty Officer," Dana Wells looked up from her jury-rigged control panel, her hands covered in grease and her uniform stained with chemical burns. "The asteroid mining charges work better than regular missiles, sir. They're designed to crack rocks so ship armor doesn't slow them down much." "And the construction drones? Those are working even better," Dana grinned. "We programmed them to build space stations so they just attach to enemy ships and start building. The Zephyrians panic when their hulls start getting rebuilt around them." Mitchell nodded with satisfaction. His ships looked like helpless civilian vessels until the moment they opened fire. Hidden missile launchers disguised as cargo holds, defensive systems built from shield generators meant for asteroid mining, and weapons that were originally designed to move mountains. "Sir," called out his communications officer, "we're getting surrender requests from the remaining Zephyrian ships." "Tell them to power down weapons and prepare to be boarded," Mitchell replied, "and remind them that if they try anything stupid, we have enough mining charges left to turn this entire system into an asteroid field." Meanwhile, on the surface of Kethara, Sergeant First Class Kevin Torres crouched behind a pile of rubble that had once been a Zephyrian command post. Around him, a mixed group of human soldiers and alien volunteers prepared for their next mission. "The enemy has fortified the main city," Torres explained to his squad, pointing at a crude map drawn in the dirt. "They've got energy shields, heavy weapons, and about 1,000 soldiers. Standard military thinking says we need at least 3,000 troops to take a position like that." Private Joe Carter, barely 19 years old, raised his hand. "So how many do we actually have, Sarge?" 12. Humans and 30 volunteers from 3 different species," Torres replied. "The aliens are farmers and shopkeepers who learned to fight from watching us work." The volunteers in question were an interesting mix. There was Crix, a Beetle Clan engineer who had figured out how to turn farming equipment into weapons. Nala, a crystal being who could interface directly with computer systems, and Tor, a young Iron Star whose people's honor code had been shattered by watching humans win through pure creativity. "How do we take a fortified city with 43 people?" asked Corporal Maria Santos. Torres smiled the same way Sergeant Kate Johnson had smiled at Proxima Station 200 years earlier. "We don't take the city, we make the city take itself." 3 hours later, the Zephyrian garrison commander received reports that made no sense. His water purification system had somehow been reprogrammed to pump sleeping gas through the buildings. His communication array was broadcasting children's songs from Earth at maximum volume. His defensive shields were flickering on and off in a pattern that spelled out rude words in the local language. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his technical staff. "Sir, it appears that maintenance workers entered the systems 3 days ago," his chief engineer reported nervously. "They had proper identification and said they were here to perform routine upgrades." "What maintenance workers?" "The ones you sent us, sir. The order came directly from your office." The garrison commander felt his heart sink as he realized what had happened. The humans hadn't attacked his city. They had walked in the front door, smiled politely, and started taking it apart from the inside. By nightfall, half his garrison was unconscious from the sleeping gas, the other half couldn't communicate due to the noise from the speakers, and his weapon systems had been reprogrammed to play a complicated piece of Earth music every time someone tried to fire them. Though, surrender came at dawn. Back in space, the situation was getting more complex by the hour. War Prince Thakmor had gathered the scattered remains of his fleet around a massive space station called the Void Crown. It was the Zephyrian Empire's ultimate weapon, capable of destroying entire planets with a single shot. "This ends now," Thakmor announced over all frequencies. "I challenge the human commander to single combat. If you defeat me in honorable battle, my forces will withdraw. If I win, your people will leave this galaxy forever." Major Park received the message aboard the Iron Will and couldn't help but laugh. "He still doesn't understand, does he?" Commander Stone shook his head. 200 years of isolation and they still think we care about honor." "What's our response?" asked Captain Morrison, who had been coordinating rescue operations throughout the sector. Park thought for a moment, then activated the communication system. "War Prince Thakmor, this is Major Lisa Park. Your challenge is rejected. We don't fight duels while civilians are dying. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally." "You refuse to face me?" Thakmor's voice carried shock and outrage. "You have no honor." "You're right," Park replied calmly. "We have something better. We have results." The transmission ended, and Park turned to her staff. "Commander Stone, I need your people to find a way onto that space station. Captain Mitchell, how close can your merchant ships get without being detected?" "Close enough," Mitchell replied from his ship. "Captain Morrison, what's the status on civilian evacuations?" "Almost complete," Jake reported. "Most of the refugee ships are now in safe systems." Park nodded. "Then it's time to end this." What happened next became legendary throughout the galaxy, though most species refused to believe the reports. The Void Crown was the most heavily defended space station ever built, surrounded by force fields that could stop entire fleets and weapons that could crack moons. It was also, as Commander Stone pointed out, a construction project built by people who thought in straight lines. The assault began with Captain Mitchell's merchant ships approaching the station disguised as supply vessels. When challenged, they provided authorization codes that were completely genuine because Chief Wells had hacked the Zephyrian computer system and created them 5 minutes earlier. While the fake supply ships docked, Commander Stone's assault team approached from the opposite direction, using a garbage disposal shuttle they had stolen from a mining operation. The station's sensors ignored them because, as Stone explained to his team, nobody expects an invasion force to arrive in a trash truck. The two groups met inside the station's central core, where they discovered that the Void Crown's ultimate weapon had a critical weakness. It was controlled by a computer system that assumed anyone with proper access codes must be authorized to use it. "This is too easy," muttered Sergeant Torres as he watched his teammate reprogram the station's main computer using skills learned from video games. That's the thing about people who fight with honor, Stone replied. They assume everyone else does too. They never consider that someone might lie, cheat, or sneak around. 20 minutes later, War Prince Thakmor watched in horror as his ultimate weapon powered down. His space station's defenses failed, and his entire fleet found itself surrounded by human ships that had somehow appeared from nowhere. Impossible, he whispered. The Void Crown cannot be taken. It is the greatest fortress in the galaxy. His communications officer looked up from his console with the expression of disbelief. Sir, I'm receiving a message from the station's main computer. It says thank you for choosing human technical solutions for all your fortress removal needs. Please rate your experience on a scale of 1 to 10. Thakmor stared at the message for a long moment, then slowly reached for the surrender controls. For the first time in his life, he understood why the galaxy had been afraid of humanity. They didn't just win wars, they made winning look easy. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered 12 systems in as many days, had been defeated by a human force that was outnumbered 50 to 1. More importantly, they had been defeated using tactics that other species were already starting to copy. The age of civilized warfare was ending. The age of human warfare was about to begin. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was quieter than it had ever been in 300 years. Speaker Veltar stood at the center, his blue skin pale as he read the final reports from the Zephyrian conflict. Around him, representatives from dozens of worlds sat in stunned silence. The war is over, Veltar announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The Zephyrian Empire has surrendered unconditionally. All occupied worlds have been liberated. All civilian prisoners have been released. Counselor Jara of the Beetle clans clicked her mandibles nervously. How long did it take? 17 days, Veltar replied. From the moment human forces left their solar system until War Prince Thakmor signed the surrender documents. A murmur ran through the chamber. The council had been debating proper response protocols for longer than that. Their combined fleets were still gathering in staging areas, preparing for a war that was already over. What about casualties? Asked Ambassador Crix from his floating chair. Veltar consulted his datapad. Zephyrian military losses were 93%. Human losses were... He paused, checking the numbers again. 12 soldiers wounded. None killed. The silence that followed was deafening. General Torvanus of the Iron Stars leaned forward, his mechanical voice showing disbelief. How is that possible? The Zephyrians had over 200 warships. According to the reports, most Zephyrian ships surrendered rather than fight, Veltar explained. Their crews said the humans had turned warfare into something they could not understand or counter. On Earth, Admiral Ben Clark sat in his office looking out at the peaceful blue sky. A week had passed since the last human ships returned from the campaign, and he was still processing what had happened. His forces had achieved a victory so complete that it defied all military logic. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Major Lisa Park entered, now wearing the insignia of a full colonel. Behind her came Captain Jake Morrison, recently promoted after his role in coordinating the refugee operations. You wanted to see us, sir? Park asked. Clark gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. I've been reading the after-action reports. What you accomplished out there was remarkable. But I need to understand something. Sir? Morrison asked. The galaxy is terrified of us again, Clark said bluntly, more than they were 200 years ago. I'm getting messages from council species asking if we plan to conquer them next. Park shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Admiral, we only fought to protect civilians. We never targeted non-military assets. I know that. You know that. But they don't see it that way, Clark replied. To them, you took apart an empire in 17 days using garbage trucks and farming equipment. They're not afraid of our weapons or our ships. They're afraid of our minds. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the effects of human military intervention were spreading like ripples in a pond. On the Crystal Confederation homeworld, engineers studied recordings of human tactics and began developing their own Adaptive Combat Units. The Iron Stars Military Academy started teaching courses on creative problem solving and unconventional resource utilization. Most disturbing to the old military establishment, junior officers from every species were questioning why their forces still used formal battle lines and predictable strategies when humans had proven there were better ways to fight. 3 months after the war ended, Seer Nairu sat in the rebuilt capital of Altani Prime, watching construction crews repair the damage from the Zephyrian occupation. Many of the workers were human volunteers who had stayed behind to help rebuild what the enemy had destroyed. She was not surprised when Speaker Veltar arrived for an unannounced visit. "The Council has made a decision," Veltar said without preamble. "We want to invite humanity back into galactic civilization." "With conditions?" Nairu asked. "With restrictions," Veltar admitted. Human military forces would operate under Council oversight. Their tactics would be reviewed and approved before use. Their weapons technology would be shared with Council inspectors. Nairu looked at him with sad amusement. "You still don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "Why you were really afraid of them." Before Veltar could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a small human transport ship. Colonel Lisa Park stepped out, followed by Admiral Clark and a small, diplomatic team. Word had spread that the Council was meeting to discuss humanity's future, and the humans had come to speak for themselves. An hour later, the key figures sat around a conference table in the temporary government building. Veltar had explained the Council's offer, and the humans had listened politely without interruption. "That's very generous," Admiral Clark said when the speaker finished. "But we decline." Veltar's skin darkened with surprise. "You refuse to rejoin galactic civilization?" "We refuse to be leashed," Colonel Park said calmly. "You want to control our military because you're afraid of what we might do with it. Your people turned warfare into something brutal and efficient," Jara clicked angrily. "You ignore all traditions of honorable combat." Park leaned forward. "Let me tell you what really scares you about human warfare. It's not that we fight dirty, it's not that we use unconventional weapons. It's not even that we win quickly." She paused, looking each alien representative in the eyes. "What scares you is that we fight to end the fighting. While you're worried about honor and tradition, we're focused on stopping people from dying. We don't care if our victories are beautiful or ceremonial. We care if they work." Admiral Clark took over. 200 years ago, you banned us because other species started copying our tactics. You said we were making warfare too brutal, but the real problem was that we were making it too effective. "Civilized warfare serves a purpose," Veltar protested. "It allows disputes to be settled without devastating entire civilizations." "No," Morrison said quietly. "Civilized warfare allows rulers to play games with other people's lives. Your honor, codes and formal challenges aren't about protecting civilians. They're about making sure that wars last long enough for politicians to benefit from them." Nairu nodded slowly. "This is what I tried to tell you before. Humans don't see war as a contest or a ritual. They see it as a disease that needs to be cured as quickly as possible." Veltar was quiet for a long moment. "What do you propose?" Clark stood up. "We'll establish the Terran Military Advisory Corps. Any species that wants to learn from us can send officers to train with our forces. We'll share our knowledge freely, but we won't be controlled by people who think war should be fair." "And if some species use this knowledge for conquest?" Jara asked. "Then they'll discover that other species have learned it too," Park replied. "The age of civilized warfare is over. You can either adapt or be conquered by someone who has." Months later, the first class of alien cadets arrived at the new Galactic Defense Academy on Mars. They came from dozens of species, all eager to learn the human way of warfare. The Academy's motto, carved in stone above the main entrance, read, "Victory through innovation, peace through strength." Colonel Park, now the Academy's commandant, watched the mixed groups of human and alien students working together in the training fields. They were learning more than tactics and strategy. They were learning to think like humans, to see every problem as solvable, every limitation as a challenge to overcome. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" asked Captain Morrison, who, served as the Academy's coordinator for interspecies cooperation. Park watched a young Beetle Clan cadet successfully modify a farming tool into a defensive weapon while her human partner cheered her on. 100 years from now, there won't be any more Zephyrian empires, she said, not because we conquered them, but because everyone will know how to stop them. And if that knowledge is misused, Park smiled, then someone else will figure out how to stop whoever misuses it. That's the human way. Every problem has a solution. You just have to be willing to find it. Above them, the red sky of Mars stretched endlessly, and somewhere among the stars, the galaxy was learning to think like humanity. For better or worse, the universe would never be the same. The age of predictable warfare was ending. The age of infinite possibility had begun. In the Academy's Memorial Hall, a holographic display showed the faces of every human who had died in galactic conflicts, starting with Sergeant Kate Johnson and her squad at Proxima Station. Below their images, a simple plaque bore the words that had become humanity's unofficial military doctrine. We fight not for glory or honor, but so that others may live in peace. We win not to prove our superiority, but to prove that winning is possible. We adapt not because we are clever, but because the alternative is unacceptable. The galaxy had finally learned why humans were banned from galactic war, not because they were too weak or too brutal, but because they were too human. And now, slowly but surely, the galaxy was learning to be human too.